Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to dive deep into a topic that I think a lot of you are really interested in. Autistic meltdowns, and then this intermittent explosive disorder. And we want to really kind of tease apart what these experiences are, how they're different, and what it means when they actually kind of show up together. So the article we're going to be looking at is called Understanding Autistic Meltdowns and Intermittent Explosive Disorder: Similarities, Differences, and Co-occurrences from Cheapaba.
And they both involve these, intense outbursts, but we're going to really kind of tease apart why they're so fundamentally different. It's not just behavior.
Exactly. And I think that's where it gets, I think a lot of people, when they hear about autistic meltdowns, they think temper tantrum.
Right.
And that is such a misconception. It is not a kid. This is not volitional. This is not someone trying to get their way.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an uncontrollable reaction to being, just overwhelmed with distress. And it can be a lot of different things, but sensory overload, anxiety, those are very common triggers. Imagine being in a situation where you're just hit with all these sensations. Maybe, you've got the flickering fluorescent lights, maybe a piece of clothing is just driving you crazy because it's scratchy. And then, you're in a crowded room and there's just noise everywhere. It can be completely debilitating.
Yeah, and I think we've all had those moments, right? Where you walk into a loud concert and the music is thumping and the lights are going and everybody's talking over each other. And you feel that
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of sensory overload. So now amplify that times 100. And imagine not being able to get out of that situation.
Right. And during a meltdown, it's so important to remember that the person isn't choosing to be difficult.
Right.
They are experiencing this distress. And they can't control it. Their nervous system is in overdrive.
It's about understanding.
Yeah.
It's not about judging.
Yes.
So then on the flip side, we have IED, Intermittent Explosive Disorder. So this is a mental health condition marked by, again, sudden outbursts, but it's anger.
Yeah.
Right? And it's really sort of out of proportion to whatever the trigger was. Would you say that's...
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with IED. It's that impulsivity. There might be a trigger there, but the reaction, the intensity of the reaction, it just doesn't really, it's mismatched.
So if someone, is having a printer jam and then they completely overreact, to a degree that is just so beyond. Now, again, we're talking about a spectrum here. This is just one small example. IED is a serious condition. It has serious consequences.
And I think one of the other distinguishing things is what happens afterward. If someone's had this outburst, if they've got IED, they might actually feel a sense of relief, at least initially. They may have some guilt, remorse later, but in that moment. Whereas, if someone's had a meltdown, it takes a while to recover. You're exhausted. Your nerves are completely frayed.
Right.
It takes a while to kind of come back down from that.
So it's we've got these two, separate things.
Yeah.
Meltdowns, IED, but I imagine that there's got to be some gray area here.
Oh, absolutely. And you brought up a great point, right at the beginning. What does it mean when they kind of show up together? And that's when this conversation becomes so important because...
But it's not always clear cut.
Right. It's not always one or the other.
Right.
Someone might have autism. They might experience meltdowns, but they might also have IED.
Right.
Or vice versa. Or it could be mistaken for one when it's really the other. It gets kind of murky.
And I would think that must make diagnosis so challenging.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially for those individuals where it really is both. Because if you don't know what you're treating, how can you possibly,
And misdiagnosis happens all the time. You think about a kid who's, maybe having these outbursts at school and, maybe they're, without really understanding what's going on, maybe they get labeled as just having behavioral problems, oppositional defiant disorder, when actually what's happening is they're having meltdowns because they're, the sensory input is too much, or they're anxious about the social situations, or maybe it is both. Maybe they have autism, it's undiagnosed, and now the IED is even harder to manage because...
Yeah, that makes it really, really tricky. And that's where I think having those informed professionals involved, people who really understand the ins and outs of both autism, IED, the whole...
Because you can't approach the treatment in isolation.
Right.
If you're just treating, let's say, the IED, but you're not thinking about how autism might be playing a role, what's triggering them, their ability to kind of cope with things, you're missing this huge piece.
You're not treating the whole person.
Yeah.
You're just treating this one little symptom.
Right.
And also understanding that symptom, that behavior is a form of communication.
Oh, 100%. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I think a lot of times, these outbursts, whether it's a meltdown or it's IED, it's a way of communicating, right, something's wrong, I'm struggling. But they might not have the words. Or they might not have, the emotional skills to kind of express it in a different way.
Exactly. And that's where I think having those strategies in place can make such a difference,
Oh,
right?
for sure. And it starts with understanding, okay, what does this person need? What are their triggers? And how can we create a plan that actually takes all of this into account?
So let's dive into some of those strategies. So whether it's, a meltdown, an outburst related to IED, the complexities of both, what can people do to kind of navigate these really, really tough, intense emotional experiences? So we're talking about tools, we're talking about support. Like, where do we even begin?
Well, I think it really starts with, understanding compassion. Remember, this is really, really hard for the person who's going through it. And it's not about, labeling, it's not about judging, it's about, okay, where are they at? And what's
Right.
going to work for them?
How can we help them feel safe,
Yeah.
supported? And are there things that, if someone, whether it's a meltdown or it's, an outburst related to IED, like what can people do in the heat of the moment that could be helpful?
Yeah. So one of the things that can be really, really helpful is deep breathing. Teaching someone, okay, when you feel like you're getting overwhelmed, let's just slow down, take some deep breaths. It can really help regulate that nervous system, kind of de-escalate the
It's
situation.
like hitting the brakes.
Exactly.
When you feel that runaway train coming.
And it's not just about, those moments, right? Like mindfulness in general can be really helpful. Just, helping someone become aware of their emotions, the physical sensations, just being present in the moment. All of that can really help with managing those reactions.
That's self-awareness, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm feeling this
Yeah.
instead of it just like taking over.
Exactly. And creating a sensory-friendly environment, especially for those meltdowns.
Yeah.
Think about reducing the noise, maybe dimming the lights if that's an issue. Like just those little things can make a really big difference. Having, some calming sensory tools, things like that.
It's about making that space, that room, wherever they are,
Yeah.
as, safe and as kind of grounding as possible, right?
Yeah. But, even with all of that, I think it's so important to, reach out to professionals who get it, right?
Right.
Who understand both the autism, the IED, because they can really help tailor, a treatment plan, whether it's, therapy, medication, a combination, it's
Building that team, right?
yes,
Having those experts.
having that support.
Yeah.
And I think it goes even beyond that. We've been talking a lot about the individual, their experience, but what if we kind of zoom out a little bit?
Yeah.
And think about how maybe our environments or expectations, how that might be contributing to some of this.
It's looking at, not just the individual, but like the bigger picture of like, how do we create a more supportive world?
Exactly. It's that empathy, that understanding, and not just for, those with meltdowns or IED, but like, we're all dealing with this stuff, right? Human emotions are complicated.
They are complicated.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for this really fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
And we'll see you all next time.